So hello and welcome, my name's Steve Nobel, and today I'm speaking with Mark Ryan on his work. Now, many of you know that Mark is an English actor, author, action director and voice actor. He's performed in several major musicals in London's West End. He's appeared in dozens of films, best known perhaps for his role as Nazir in the British TV series Robin of Sherwood, and recently working on a number of films such as the Transformer films and more recently Peterloo. He's a sword coach, fight director and an accomplished author, and has written the Greenwood Tarot and the Wildwood Tarot, and his latest offering is Wild Magic, which is designed to be a Wild Tarot Workbook. All of this published by Edison Books. His website is thewildwoodtarot.com. Hi Mark.
Hi Steve, how are you, mate?
I'm alright. Now, before we get into the world of tarot and magic, can I just ask you about your acting life? You know, what's been happening generally for you in the acting world?
Oh, it's been quite a rich potpourri, a tapestry of various adventures. I just played Peter Pan. I was in Peter Pan playing Captain Hook in San Diego. A fantastic cast and produced by the Lithgow family Panto organisation, directed by Bonnie Lithgow, and it was great fun, I have to say. I mean, it's one of those characters that if you are asked to play Captain Hook, you don't even say, oh, when, how, where, you go, yes, please, thank you. And so I immediately jumped on that, and we had a great time. And I haven't done Panto. In fact, Panto was my first real stage experience in 1970 in Manchester at the Opera House in Cinderella. I was one of the chorus lads. In fact, I did explain this to Bonnie. I was actually the back end of the pantomime horse at one point in the proceeding, carrying Hugh Lloyd. If you remember Hugh Lloyd from the Gnomes of Dulwich or the various other comedy shows that he. So I had Hugh Lloyd on my back for a while, being the rear end of the pantomime horse. And so the idea of going back and doing Panto was both curious and a bit of a challenge, but I felt it was something that I'd enjoy, and B would be great fun to do with a fun cast. And we had a great cast, and it was a great laugh, and we did great business. And it's San Diego, of all places, San Diego.
Yeah,
so
wonderful. Was there a chance to do some sword fighting in that role?
We did indeed do a sword fight. I fought Peter Pan around the the stage, and I actually choreographed that little bit of a fight because, it's one of those things. Some actors are just they're natural with this stuff, and it's easier to pick up a fight and be safe and all that kind of stuff. And some people aren't. And luckily, everybody that was involved with this was very open-minded, and we had a lot of fun with the sword fight. It was very simple, very safe, and it was easy to remember. That was the reason I did it. Right. Because we were doing dialogue in the middle of it, and it was one of those things where if you're trying to actually remember a sword fight and do dialogue at the same time, it's one of those things where you really kind of have to have your head together, because it can go horribly wrong. And so you have to kind of Riley Costello, who was playing Peter Pan, was brilliant, and we both chatted to each other, because when you look at people in the eyes on stage, and I've done this during fights and other things, sometimes you look at each other and you go, you have no idea what's coming next. And I'm sure that people looked at me during the course of the show and went, he's no idea what's coming next, because obviously as Hook, you're allowed to ad-lib a lot with the audience, and so I ad a lot with the audience, and then you're trying to fight your way back into the dialogue and bring the show back to where it's supposed to be. But Riley Costello was Peter Pan, and we did a little sword fight together. But there was also Ashley Alcota. She was brilliant. Clarice Ordas was in it. David F.M. Vaughan, I'll call him by his full name, David Vaughan, was in it as well. He plays Smee, so we had a lot of fun. Audrey Whitby was in it. She played Wendy. It was fantastic. Cast was great. We had a lot of fun. And as I say, those moments with Riley were great, because we had to, when you're trying to actually do dialogue and a sword fight at the same time, unless you have a lot of time to rehearse it, it can be quite challenging. And Riley handled it very, very well as flying. Poor lad. They flew him all over the place into the sea. We had a couple of mishaps, but it was a great show, great fun to do. So that's what I did in December.
Wonderful. Now we've already spoken before in other interviews about your journey in Wildwood Tarot. Can you just as a general, where are you at now? You've been at it for a long time, diving into the world of tarot and magic. So where are you at now with all of this?
Well, it's been along an interesting journey, and I don't think, in the classic sense, there's an end to the journey. I think it's an evolution. And one of the things I wanted to do with Wild Magic was to talk about that evolution and where to go with it, and where magic and science has gone with it. And so for me, this whole thing started probably 1979 in Los Angeles. There was a store there called the Bodhi Tree, which is a much lost and lamented store in Los Angeles on Melrose Avenue, and I actually lectured there a couple of times about the Greenwood Tarot, funnily enough. And the Bodhi Tree was this big esoteric bookstore which had the most amazing atmosphere, and I bought probably my first tarot deck there, it's bizarre because the name of the actual deck has completely gone out of my head, but I remember looking at it and looking at the pictures, and it was recommended to me by one of the people in there, and I remember taking it back and looking at it and going, this does not speak to me at all. I don't understand what this is trying to say. So the pictures were very chaotic and very sort of almost like cut and stamped onto the cards, in the sense that it looked like a collage, but the imagery didn't speak to me. So that was the first inclination I got, that although I was fascinated by the concept of tarot, it was also a very personal thing. I think shortly after that, on somebody else's advice, I did buy a Rider-Waite deck, which I found more accessible, certainly, and the imagery more accessible, and the system more accessible, and yet it still, in a way, didn't come naturally. I had to struggle with the framework, which is why partly we developed the Wheel of the Year system for Greenwood Tarot. The Kabbalistic system, again, just wasn't easy for me, and I did try to work on it and get my head around it and get it into feeling like a natural system. The Kabbalistic system just did not work for me, and that again was part of the motivation. It wasn't just the imagery, it was the system that the imagery was based in that just did not feel a natural fit. And that's when I realized that tarot cards are extremely personal, and your access with them and to them can be as personal as talking to another personality. So that was how that sort of all started, but it took 20 odd years for me to work that part of it out and go, okay, maybe you should actually seriously look at the concept of designing and building a system that works for you. And obviously on the part of that journey along came a show called Robin of Shield, and my exposure to that part of the esoteric backstory in Europe, and particularly in Britain, which that immediately was accessible to me. I grew up with that, I understood that, and that was part of that evolution of building a system that was more accessible for me personally, but I obviously hoped it would be more accessible to people that were interested in that part of the Wildwood esoteric side of it, and to Europe. So that's how it started.
Okay, brilliant. Now your fans have been sending in all kinds of questions, so I'm just going to send them to you and see what you're going to respond to them. So is the Wildwood Tarot suitable for a brand new tarot reader?
I think it is. I think that it really depends on where you are with the imagery. A lot of not criticisms or comments that I've read online, and people that have been using the deck, what they say is this is a completely different system to most of the systems that are out there. It's based on the Wheel of the Year system. So don't go into it thinking that the way that the cards, as in the Rider-Waite, or the imagery in the Rider-Waite, and even the elements in the Rider-Waite, they're not the same. It's different. And we did it purposefully like that because that's how instinctively it felt. And John and I and Cheska and I both felt the same thing, that instinctively and intuitively the way that we looked at the animals and the seasons and the wheel of the year was a much more natural flow of energy, if you like, of these archetypes. And so a lot of first-time readers that go into tarot will look at this, and if it speaks to them, then probably they'll stick with it because that's the system that talks to them. For readers that have probably started out with a different esoteric system, one based on Kabbalah, say, and again, I've nothing against Kabbalah, it's not a natural fit for me, may find that it may find Wildwood or Greenwood a little bit different. Well, just see it, try it, and work with it, and see if it speaks to you. A lot of the stuff I read online around the imagery, particularly Will Worthington's artwork, which is absolutely brilliant, is that the imagery speaks profoundly and clearly to people, that they get an immediate hit of the imagery, and some of the imagery has been described as just, brilliant, which it is. So to me, if you're starting out, start out with this deck, see if it speaks to you. I mean, it may not, or it may be the day that you go, all right, I don't want to try anything else, this one talks to me and I'm going to stick with it. But for people who have read other decks first and tried other systems first, they might at first look at this and go, I don't quite get how this works, but then once it clicks into their consciousness, I'm sure they're going to go, okay, this works. And that seems to be the results that most people online that I've looked at who have said very nice things, and thank you all for saying so many nice things, and people who've spent literally hours doing YouTube dissertations on even unwrapping the box. I've seen a couple about people talking about unwrapping the box. Just those alone, that people have been extremely kind, and it's extremely humbling to have people talk about this in the way that they do. But so yeah, I would say yes, go for it. If you're a first time reader, go for it.
So another question here is why is there no information about reversals in the Wildwood Tarot accompanying book?
Because we did address that in Wild Magic, and in fact I think Kathleen did a whole thing about reading reversals, and it's one of those issues that sometimes you have to put your own perceptions aside and go, well, people do read. And I'll answer the question this way: I don't personally read reversals. I prefer to read the imagery as it was meant to be seen, and within the reading that you do, or the layout that you do, there will always be a reversal, if you like, of the energy to show you what may be standing in the way, or what may be the challenges, or what you need to deal with to move forward. So I always feel within the layout that you do, there's always a reversal within the pattern that you're getting. So the idea to me that you would read a card upside down never really worked for me. But even as one of the authors of this system, I understand that people who have learned to read reversals want to read reversals. So however, it's not something that I can honestly say I look at and go, yeah, that's a natural flow. Caitlin addressed this in Wild Magic, and she did an entire section about reading the reversals in the book, because she was much more adept than I at doing that. So she talks about that in Wild Magic.
Now, why are some of the court cards switched around in the Wildwood from their original placements in the Greenwood?
Well, originally when I wrote the Greenwood, and I know this sounds a little maybe even too esoteric, but it just felt natural at the time that I did it. There's a lot of mythos about the West, and I wanted to talk about the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, and how the west was always seen when people head west. They basically head out over what we now understand is the Atlantic Ocean, whether it's towards Atlantis, whether it's to America, or wherever people were heading. That concept of heading where the sun rises and then the sun sets, to chase the sun and follow the sun that way. So I naturally put a lot of the elements that I associated with the West on the left side of the circle itself. And when I sat down with John, we talked about it, and I understood there was a traditional meaning why some of these were actually should be on the other side of the cycle. We kept north and south, of course, and the winter and the summer, and we just kind of reversed it round to see what sort of what that did to the system. And to be honest with me, again, it didn't really affect the energy flow. It just simply placed some of those elements into a more traditional map of tarot. And John and I talked about it a lot, but I decided with him that was probably we've done so many untraditional things to the system that adding a slightly more traditional flow like that with the court cards and stuff might help people access the system who were used to a more traditional system. So that's why we did that, and it didn't harm the natural flow of the energy. So I was like, okay, well, let's try it and see what happens. We're soon going to know if it messes up the system. We're going to get emails and letters, but everybody seems to like it, so it stayed that way. But again, in the original deck, it was simply because of my perception of East and West and mythos related to the sun travelling through the sky, and that's why we did it that way originally. But it's worked just as well now, and we've put it back into a more traditional framework.
Now, what made you write the wild magic in the format it's in?
Well, there's been some one or two of the notes that I've seen from folks, and again, I've got some of the emails here, but I'm not going to name names, but I hope this addresses some of the questions, is that there seems to be a lot of complaints about the size of the actual font, which I think is a 10, which is a pretty standard. I'm looking at the book right now, funnily enough, and maybe it's just me, I can read this quite clearly. It doesn't seem cramped to me, and there's plenty of white or clear space in the book and in the actual breaking down of the major arcana, so it doesn't seem cramped. It's perfectly legible. I'm sure that if there are questions about that, maybe, I don't know, in the future, maybe we could do a bigger book and lay this all out with bigger pictures, full-size pictures and larger print. But obviously it was a decision by the publisher, both Edison Books and Sterling in New York. And the book fits rather nicely right into the box. Funny enough, the Greenwood Tarot comes in. It's exactly the same size book as the book, the accompanying book in Wildwood Tarot. So that may be just the standard way that they do it. We try to pack in as much information, I thought about that as well, as we could, ranging all over the map, as again, that's kind of got a few people criticising the book, which we can talk about later on if you like. Really, it was a decision by the publishers, but looking at it right now, even as I'm looking at it where pages are full, it doesn't seem cramped, and I can read it quite clearly, so I don't really know how to address that one.
Will the UV finish be extended to the US printed versions of the Wildwood Tarot?
Now, that's an interesting question, and I know that both Nick and Stefan at Edison, this was a decision that they made following, and just to show that we actually do listen to people out there. That, I mean, people, if you have a criticism or you have something, we do listen to it and look at it, and if we can do something about it, we will. There was a couple of people, I don't know how much use of their decks they'd had. I suppose if you use the deck every day, if you're a professional reader as well, you're going to batter some of the cards a little bit. But there were some complaints about the thickness of the actual card stock itself, which I have obviously an original Greenwood, which I've had for, I don't know, 20 years or something now, more than 20 years, 30 years, and it still works quite well. And the Wildwood one of the original ones I've had, it seems to have held up pretty well under under constant regular use. So I've had no problems personally with the cardstock, but it was something that Stefan and Nick wanted to address. So they did this batch of this UV laminated finish to the deck, which I have to say is absolutely beautiful. But my understanding is that for a big run of thousands of decks, which is what usually goes onto the market from the publishers like Sterling, it does add a bit more of a cost to each deck, because I think Sterling was happy where the pricing of the deck was, and then, by the way, they've been tremendously supportive. Sterling have been fantastic, but they opted to stay with the standard finish that was working apparently quite well, and not go with the extra thickening laminated finish, which is sort of been an experiment here in Europe, but I think it's been very, very well received. So I don't know what the future plans are for future larger batches of the book to be produced. I think the laminate is a nice idea. It certainly helps the thickness of the cards, but I understand it does add cost when you're doing a big run.
Yeah. Why is there a flexi-bound version of Wild Magic showing on Amazon when the book is printed as a paperback?
I have no idea. Maybe I should consult the cards. Yeah. I don't know. I think it was a simple misunderstanding at the beginning, that the concept of the workbook was an idea of a flexi spiral bound with the back of the book, which I think is a great idea, by the way, but it was never what this book was intended to be. That was always my understanding, that it wasn't going to be spiral bound. I don't know where that idea came from. It was obviously a miscommunication between Amazon and the publishers. But what I've seen, which I thought was absolutely marvellous, was that I think there's a picture of it online. You can walk into any one of these big printing stores and actually have the book spiral bound for about $5. So if you actually want to have a spiral bound version, you can walk into one of these I'm trying to think of the names now of these big companies that do printing and office supplies and all that, and they'll do it for you for about $3 or something, $3.50, when they'll put a spiral into it for you. But I know a couple of people have done that, and I have to say it looked rather impressive. And I understand why they want that, because they want to be able to open the book out, make notes, and fold it or have it open without having to have a bookmark or something. So I think that's a brilliant idea. Maybe it's something that the publishers will consider in the future. But it was simply, I believe, and I know John has tried to address this online as well, on the Wildwood Facebook page, run by Alison. Thank you so much. She's a dedicated girl, that is. She feels Ali feels all these questions and sends them to me and says, I think there's one for you here. I don't know what this one's about. So, but no, Alison Cross has been brilliant running the Wildwood Facebook page and the site, by the way. And John responded to that and said exactly what I just said, is because neither of us ever expected it to be a spiral-bound book.
No, this one sounds a bit random. I've seen a blog post that says I can freely make myself a Greenwood Tarot. Is that right?
The answer is no, you can't. The answer is no. I'll deal with this one because I have sort of a semi-announcement to make about that, because it's been something that I've been approached about this over the years, about can we do a reprint of the Greenwood, and I am actively right now, and I know this is going to cause all kinds of rummagings online, but I am actively exploring doing a limited print run of the Greenwood Tarot, self-publishing it myself. I believe I have all the permissions needed to do that, and I know there is a website that is selling Greenwood Tarot and various books from Cheska. I've written to that lady. She's not responded to me. I've written to her saying, who gave you permission to do this? She's not responded. I'm not going to say who her name is, and if you want to go and find it. So she's doing this completely without my permission, and as of right now, I am the sole arbiter, because I own the rights. So Cheska, wherever you are, if you're listening, please contact me, because if you do hear this, I'd love to hear from you, but as I am the only functioning holder of the right for Greenwood Tarot, I am going to publish a self-published small run of an exclusive version, because there's been a lot of versions online which have been counterfeited. We believe that there's been various publishing, counterfeiters out there republishing and selling these decks for a lot of money. And I believe that is being a criminal enterprise, let's put it that way. Anybody that has an original Greenwood by HarperCollins, hang on to it, because it will do nothing but go up in value. But what I've decided to do anyway, is to put it back into a very limited circulation with a special edition of Greenwood. And we're working on the best way to do that right now. So anybody that's got any issues regarding that, please contact me directly. But if you don't, that's what I'm planning to do. But no, you can't just print a offline and do that, because it's a contravention of my right in both intellectual rights to the artwork, and I do have intellectual rights to the artwork, because, as I've explained to various people, there were several times when Cheska actually, when we discussed the cards, couldn't draw the cards. She basically was struggling to come up with some of the imagery. So I actually, on more than one occasion, we sat down and I drew what I believed the card should be, and that is what she based her artwork on. So my imagery regarding some of the cards, particularly some of the more esoteric cards, which we based some of the work in Wildwood, directly came from me. The imagery of the lady coming out of the water and the soul in the boat and all that kind of stuff was directly out of my experiences when researching this, and soul journeying or trance journeying or whatever you want to say it. So all of that artwork was based on a lot of my experiences. And our experiences together. Cheska and I did go to, the White Horse at Uffington and Wayland Smith and a lot of those places, and we experienced that stuff together. So as far as I'm concerned, I had a lot of input into intellectual input into the actual physical manifestation of the cards, and so I believe I have the right to redo that artwork and represent it as it was done originally, and we'll do it on a limited basis and see how it goes. But that's the plan at the moment. Anybody's got any objections, please contact me directly.
Okay. Now there's a question here. Why is the Five of Vessels interpretation so different to what we normally see in the Five of Cups?
Crikey. A lot of these cards, don't forget, came not out of the traditional system. So yes, well, I know exactly why this card came about, but why it differs from the traditional card, I honestly couldn't tell you. So anybody out there that's got a definition of what that traditional card was, please again write into wildwoodtarot.com or write into the Facebook one, and but I couldn't tell you what the reading was. But obviously, Five of Vessels, ecstasy, it used to do with the balancing of an enjoyment of life, as opposed to not enjoying life. You know what I mean? That drumbeat of the soul is healthy to surrender for a time to join in the dance. Energy renewed, bathing in the cosmic life force of exaltation and sincere ecstasy. Now, I don't know if the Five of Vessels in the traditional deck was a negative reading, but I mean, for me, obviously, 5 being a mystical number, where this was all about, don't forget to stand still sometimes, smell the roses, and enjoy life. Because we live in a very pressurized life, sometimes we forget how lucky we are to live in a peaceful, sane, or semi-sane environment. Be thankful for and to enjoy the blessings that we have.
Well, I've got a final question for you, Mark. What advice do you have for people who are in the southern hemisphere trying to apply the festivals of the wheel of the year to their own seasons?
Yes, this is an interesting question, and it's one I was asked when I was in Australia, because I did a tarot chat down in Australia when I was down there doing a fan convention, and it was one of the things that, funny enough, we had sort of addressed in our own minds, but we didn't put it into the book. And I have actually suggested doing not a redrawing, but adjusting the actual seasons and the animals, funnily enough, to a more southern hemisphere orientated version. Whether that was a chapter in the book, we did talk about putting into this book, or a separate book or a separate worksheet. And I've been thinking about the different animals down there as well, which represent the same sort of turning of the seasons that would align with the European Northern Hemisphere animals. And for that, I was reading up a lot of the traditional outback Aboriginal concepts with animals, because as you know, the Aborigines have a very intimate relationship with nature and with animals. So it's something I have explored, and it's something that we have discussed either doing as a chapter in the book or even as a separate book. But I would love to get into that more, and in fact I've done a bit of research on that already. So again, if there's any publishers out there that's interested in doing a Southern Hemisphere version of the tarot deck based on the original Southern Hemisphere animals and even the stars in the sky, of course, are different. So I'd be very happy to talk to them. But is this something that we have thought about and addressed? And I would love to do something, maybe a chapter, an additional chapter in Wild Magic, should we ever get to do another version of that, or a bigger book of the Wild Magic with bigger pictures of the artwork. You don't really appreciate this artwork until you see it full size. When John and I did the original tour in America, we went to Atlanta and various other places, Seattle, and one of the people that was actually attending brought with him his iPad, and we actually projected the cards. They were like 6 feet by 4 feet. They may have even been bigger at one point. They were like 9 feet by 6 feet. And it's not until you actually see those images at that size, you could almost walk into the card. It was so impressive that you start seeing details that Will put in that it's difficult to spot just on a card. But when you see them 6 feet by 4 feet or 9 feet by 5 feet, whatever, you suddenly go, wow, the detail, the intricate detail that Will put in there. And I'm not being funny. You could almost, you feel like you could stand up and walk into the imagery itself. I mean, maybe one day we'll talk about doing a 3D version of it or something, that you could do that with, projecting it and literally sitting there and looking at it and mentally stepping into the image. That would be fantastic. So that's, that's...
Okay, sounds like an amazing project, but a potential there. Well, I thank all the fans who wrote all this kind of great variety of questions. I'm sure your answers will generate more questions, actually, Mark. So,
well, I'll just address this one quickly. Well, if you've got 2 minutes, because one of the criticisms that I did read was about my personal ramblings about the archetypes, which to me was an important part of this, because one of the criticisms, well, it's not a workbook. Well, it may not be the standard type of workbook, but what I wanted to do was introduce people to the concept of putting yourself into the place of the archetypes. So when people talked about, a couple of people said about name dropping, I said, and I'll repeat it here, talking about Sir Anthony Hopkins, is not name dropping. He genuinely represents the Emperor to me. To meet somebody that resonated with that energy, the generosity, the skill, the charm, a man that he knows exactly where he is in life and has got his kingdom there in front of him, and he has power, but he wields it with such grace. That is the epitome of that. And he's one of those people that I think around the world people instantly recognize. And I was asking people, when have you been these archetypes? And so these little personal stories that I put into the book were not about ego trips and not about name dropping. It was about, I was trying to explain, look, these are the times that I've realized the archetypes have worked through my own life. And this is, to me, is part of the work of this book, is to look at yourself and go, when have I done this? When have I been positive, negative? When I've been supportive? When I've been destructive? When have I done this? That, to me, is part of the role of a workbook, because it is real work. It takes work to do that. So that was one of the other questions that came up, and I understand it's not your traditional workbook, but if you read the book and understand what I'm trying to get you to, challenging you, the individual, to do, there's plenty of work there, trust me, to be done for a person to look at themselves, inspect what they've done, and go, did I act in the appropriate manner in that situation? There's plenty of times that we've all made mistakes, and we've all done probably things that we regret and go, we should have done that differently. So that was part of the work that is in this workbook, is dealing and confronting sometimes those aspects of yourself. That, to me, is real work.
Oh, thanks once again, Mark. And just to remind people, your website is thewildwoodtarot.com, and no doubt we'll be chatting again, Mark, on this very subjects.
I hope so, because that hour has absolutely just rocketed past. You always have the most challenging questions, Steve. You come up with stuff, and I'm sitting here scrambling in the back of my brain to go, how did I say? Anyway, thank you so much. That was great fun. I love chatting with you. It's really nice.
Likewise, Mark. Do you take care?
Take care, mate. Yes, God bless.